Welcome, everyone. Please join me in a little applause for Minister Todor Tagarev, Defense Minister of Bulgaria. Minister, I'm very delighted to welcome you here at the Café Luitpold on the margins of the 60th edition of the Munich Security Conference 2024. Minister Tagarev is a long-standing network member of the European Leadership Network. Minister, remind me, how long have you been involved with the ELN?
That's a difficult question. Maybe at least 7, 8 years, but probably more.
Thank you for reminding me. You have resumed office as Defense Minister very lately in 2023. And it's already your second term in office, so it's a position you already held in 2013, 10 years ago. Now, as one of the most high-ranking guests of the Munich Security Conference, Minister Tagarev will give us invaluable insights into the debates at this year's MSC, and especially coming to our main topic of the evening, to what extent has the MSC been able to address one of Europe's key concerns besides Ukraine and the situation in the Middle East, which is the security situation in the Balkans and Western Balkans. Now, we are delighted that you agreed to join this conversation in an intimate atmosphere and to discuss these pressing issues with us. And I will have some questions for you, and then we will open the conversation to the audience. So please feel free to ask questions. Whatever you want to ask as serving minister, this is a very unique opportunity. So I would suggest to start with, do you want to give us a little bit of a recap of the main topics at the Munich Security Conference yesterday and today? What issues were most present?
Well, again, I'll start by expressing my gratitude for this invitation to speak to the people who are interested and who are part of this European Leadership Network. First, this is my first participation in the Munich Security Conference ever, so I do not have previous experience, and I made maybe the mistake, but also on the other hand used the opportunity to participate in many side events. So, you know, there are 2 or 3 mainstream events for all the participants and many side events. So I cannot talk about the whole conference. There certainly have been issues which I was not able to, discussions I was not able to witness or participate in. But clearly, with what you started, Ukraine was on top of the agenda. The prime event for today was the speech of President Zelensky. It was very clear about what Ukraine needs and how he sees the role of the support of the democratic countries, democratic world to Ukraine. This is absolutely no surprise to anyone. And Gaza was the second issue, the second primary issue. So on top of that, the events I participated in addressed 2 main subjects. One was how to enhance the deterrence and defense posture of NATO on the eastern flank. You can understand why I decided to participate in those events, since Bulgaria is on the eastern flank of NATO, and we're clearly, our interest is absolutely clear in having that posture as effective as possible. Another subject of interest also related to the tension as a result of Russia's aggressive policy for the last 15 years or more, but particularly after 2014 and the large-scale aggression in February 2 years ago, almost to the date. So we discussed in one of those closed sessions the role of nuclear deterrence. That is still there, and we need to find ways to have that as effective as possible, no matter what developments and what results the elections bring around the world and among the allies as well. Another topic of importance is the role of Germany. And for me, that again was well, not exactly a new topic, but still having this topic among the top priority issues discussed was something new. I had the Chancellor Scholz this morning talking to the conference. And the final event just before coming here, in which I participated, was discussing the role of autocracy versus democracy. Which approach is more effective, and what we can do. There's, my impressions are that many among the participants are somewhat pessimistic of what is going on the world, but a significant part of the participants also say, why are you so pessimistic? You see, NATO is here, NATO is strong, NATO is becoming stronger, the democratic world is richer, more organized, and when we focus on certain issues and decide to invest the necessary resources, we can certainly prevail over any opponent. I think that's so. But this for me was one of the findings, that we have like a somewhat spreading pessimism, I would say, but also optimism. And everyone has to make their own minds on which side to take. My impressions are overall optimistic from the discussions in the conference.
I participated in just a few discussions, and I felt like this is really a dividing line between people who tend to be optimistic and pessimistic, and it's very easy to say pessimistic for the time being. But as an expert at the panel yesterday said, being pessimistic is not an intellectual effort. Being optimistic and finding solutions is. You pointed to an interesting topic, which is on several interesting topics. On the first of all, deterrence and defense, which I think we can speak about later, in the role of Germany. But maybe if we look at a topic that might be very emotional for people and might also be very interesting for the audience, just an hour before the MSC began, the death of Navalny was announced, or at least the news broke. We don't know whether he died yesterday or before, or whether he's dead at all. Can you just quickly tell us something about the mood at the conference? I can assume that this was quite emotional for many people.
Absolutely. Even it came during the conference already, although before the official opening, we had a meeting with Secretary Blinken, and that's when I found out, because after the statements of Secretary Blinken and Bulgarian Prime Minister Denkov, the journalists started, what would you say about Navalny? That's when I heard about it. Unfortunately, the news is confirmed both by the Russian authorities and also by people that support Navalny, and had some contacts with him. That had an obvious impact on the conference and the mood of the conference. On one hand, on the other hand, it just confirmed the realistic view on who Putin is. Even this afternoon there were statements, maybe I shouldn't say that, that was because behind closed doors statements, but basically we understand that he's a person that will not stop at anything in order to preserve his power, his grip over Kremlin. And if he's not stopped by us, basically, the Russian society is under so much psychological pressure and intimidation and just propaganda and disinformation that it will be really surprising if the society finds the strength to get up against, to stand up against Putin. At least in the near future. In the longer future, all that depends on the economic situation and whether the sanctions will have an effect, a serious effect over the Russian economy. but in the near future, we should not expect any change in the policy of Kremlin as a result of internal pressure. So the only change in Putin's policy can happen if we support strongly Ukraine, if we provide all the material assistance and the financial support which Ukraine needs so that it can stop the Russian military and it can recover its territorial integrity and sovereignty.
Now, Bulgaria, maybe for some people, especially in Germany, surprisingly, is one of the most staunchest supporters of Ukraine. And to quote a prominent German newspaper, a headline in January was, Bulgaria, the country that secretly saved Ukraine. Now, Sofia provided Ukraine, especially with munition and air defense. And 2 years into Russia's war in Ukraine, what are the projections for the future? How is Bulgaria's support for Kiev debated domestically? We all know it's a very controversial topic. I guess you have been targeted by the pro-Russian opposition. I guess people already also claim for your resignation, so it must be a very uncomfortable place for you to be in at the moment. But how do you speak to people domestically? How do you explain to them we need to continue support for Ukraine?
Well, if no one calls for my resignation in a week, I should start worrying. It happens so often, a few times a day. There are such periods. We had these unclear outcomes of elections in the country for nearly 3 years. Only one, we were able to create a regular government, and it stayed there for 7 months or so. And when we do not succeed, there is the president appoints a caretaker government, new elections, unsuccessful attempt, another caretaker government, another unsuccessful attempt. And people see the situation in Ukraine, the war in Ukraine, differently. There is as you mentioned already, there is unfortunately there are deep divisions in our society, and we just a good number of thinking people decided that although the parties who can form a majority have differences on many other issues, they do need to create a government. That's what happened in the beginning of June of last year when I became a minister and the cabinet was voted. And this cabinet now, actually the understanding of that for Bulgaria, the most important thing is the European future, security provided both by the membership in the European Union and NATO, and the support to Ukraine that is related to those endeavors is really the glue that holds I wouldn't say the cabinet, but holds the supporting parties in parliament together. And many people understand that. We have this novel arrangement. The parties that support the cabinet agreed on a rotation in 9 months. So now in a couple of weeks there will be a rotation. And we do not know exactly. What we know is that the prime minister will become vice prime minister and vice versa. So we have the former commissioner Maria Gabriel who is now vice prime minister and foreign minister, and is here in Munich. She'll be becoming prime minister in 2 weeks. For the other members of the cabinet, we'll see. What is clear, though, that indeed this Euro-Atlantic endeavor and the support to Ukraine are the glue that hold these parties together. So that policy will not change for the cabinet. And we are very clear. We understand that it's not only a moral obligation to help a country that is a victim of an attack and suffers enormous amount of atrocities, kidnappings of children, rapes, and so on. But also it's in our strategic interests to help Ukraine, because if Ukraine does not hold to the Russian aggression, it will be much more challenging to prepare for future developments for Europe generally. So how Bulgaria helped, that's really an interesting story that deserves a deeper study. because at that time we had a government that did not admit that they support Ukraine. We had an economy minister who oversees arms transfers, who is known for saying, I will not allow a single bullet to go to Ukraine. And at exactly that time, Bulgaria provided really an enormous amounts of ammunition, especially. The explanation here is that that's not well known among our allies, but already in the Soviet times, Bulgaria specialized in the production of small arms, light weapons, and ammunition. So given the size of the country and the economy, the production of ammunition is a huge part of what we do. Actually, within the European Union, there are some arguments that Bulgaria is either number 2 or number 3, but close to the top in terms of production of ammunition. And our factories indeed have been working for a long time now, 24/7, primarily for Ukraine, although, you know, the newly produced ammunition may not go directly to Ukraine. They may go to fill in the storages of allies who provide their ammunition to Ukraine, but the effect is the same here. We do allow this continuous support. In addition to that, from our military stocks, we have delivered a good amount of material as well. So, in addition to what the industry does. But what Minister Kuleba said a few months ago, the article you referred to, is especially relevant to the production capacity of the Bulgarian defense industry.
Thank you so much for shedding a bit more light on Bulgaria's support for Ukraine. And it's fascinating, and 20 years into Bulgaria's membership in NATO, your country really lives up to what then Foreign Minister Salon Pasi, who also happens to be a European Leadership Network member, said during his speech upon NATO accession of Bulgaria. And he said, "Let me once again confirm our determination to be actively engaged in the process of guiding the alliance to the endeavors, empowering it to best meet the new security challenges of the 21st century." Now, Bulgaria has shown its strong commitment to the alliance, for the alliance, not just through support for Ukraine, but also through strengthening deterrence and defense on the eastern flank. And as far as we've heard, Bulgaria is reaching the 2% goal in 2024. Now, we all know that maybe a third of NATO countries, or I guess at the moment it's more tending towards half of NATO countries are meeting this goal. For the German government, it's been very, very difficult. So I don't know whether a conversation between you and the German defense minister has happened on the issue. But what would you tell the German government or the German defense minister? Because obviously your country is in a very weak economic position, and still it's possible for you to boost your defense spending. And for Berlin, it's just very difficult.
Well, let me first disagree with the statement that we're in a weak economics position. I mean, of course, our economy cannot be compared to Germany's economy. That's absolutely clear. But there are some good indicators showing that the economy is growing. For example, the economic growth is at least twice, or rather 3 times above the EU average in the past years. Last year, we increased the minimum salary in the country by 30%, and the average salaries increased by, I don't know, for the military, we increased that by 11% just in the second half of last year, and another increase this year. We managed to do that still, because one of our endeavors is to join the Eurozone, and there are several criteria for the Eurozone. We managed to keep the deficit below 3% for 2022 and for 2023, and now for the plans for 2024 as well. Bulgaria has the second lowest debt to GDP ratio in the European Union. I think only Estonia has a lower ratio of that. And the inflation slowly is coming under control. So economically, given the size of the country, but we are progressing well. More importantly, we understand that this is needed. It's not what Mr. Trump said years ago. It's just we need to invest more in our own defense capabilities, and we are very serious about this. We are above 2%, according to the NATO way of calculation. This year will be at 2.14% of the GDP, and that will remain some years even higher. In the foreseeable future, we have a very ambitious defense investments program, and we have signed several big projects. We're launching other new projects. The percentage for investment is 1/3 this year, and in some years will be more than that. One fellow minister said in one of the closed-door discussions, so I will not mention which country he comes from, but he said, if needed, we'll double the defense budget. And the exact words were we would prefer to eat grass rather than submit to to become a Russian colony again. So, I mean, the feelings of the Bulgarian people are not that strong, but they are strong enough. So there is very clear support to investments, to the investments in defense, and we joined the club. Actually, it's not half of the country; it's close to 2/3 already. Approaching 2/3. 18 countries are already spending 2% or more on defense among the NATO allies, and others will be joining this club very soon. Okay, so as a alliance-wide effort, we are progressing pretty well. Actually, curiously, and that came out a few times during the discussions, is that now we have the money, but the industry cannot speedily come up with solutions and to supplies. So both NATO and European Union now have dedicated programs to strengthen the defense industries. Now this is more a topic of a discussion than who spends how much on defense. And that's very good understanding here. There are some very senior industry representatives also participating in the Munich Security Conference. They're very well aware, and we work jointly with them to find a good solution for everyone.
Minister, you seem to be optimistic about a range of topics, which I think is a very good attitude. How optimistic are you about Bulgaria's ability to counter Russian hybrid threats, including disinformation? A couple of weeks ago, you warned that disinformation spread by pro-Russian parties, but also other actors, leads to significant problems for the Bulgarian army when it comes to recruitment, to the receding number of new recruits. Can you tell us a bit about what is your government actively doing to counter the spread of Russian disinformation, and what are the most prolific narratives?
The example you gave is due primarily to the narrative spread by, I can call them the fifth column of Russia, pro-Russian propaganda in the country, and the narrative was that, now they'll send our boys and girls to fight and die in Ukraine. That's the narrative. And it didn't matter how many times I came out to explain that that's absolutely not true. There are no plans, no even discussions on this, and that's not possible. The Prime Minister went out several times, other colleagues went out several times, senior military explained that. That continued. And surprisingly, the war was going on in full speed in 2022. That narrative was absent, so we didn't have such serious problems with recruiting, both as soldiers and for the military academies for future officers. But that happened in 2023, when this propaganda campaign, disinformation campaign, I would say, started. There are many other narratives which are common for other European countries, like the Russian explanation for the war, about the Nazi regime, and so on. You all know that. So that is perceived well among part of the Bulgarian population, and many others. So even we are still littered with, the country is littered with Soviet monuments, and we just before Christmas took down the one in the center of Sofia, and that again they gave them the drive to increase again the propaganda effort in the country, and others. Okay. So what we do is we understand very well that countering this disinformation and propaganda needs to be a whole of government approach. Within the Ministry of Defense, I have done what is possible, and the MOD has a newspaper, it has a TV channel, not very popular, but we do have a TV channel. And we are using those channels of communications as effectively as possible. We are organizing internally with all the public relations, Stratcom activities. A number of allies are helping us with providing Stratcom training. That's regular. They understand that there is a need to increase that capacity on a governmental level. We haven't found yet, I would say, the best solution possible. We are still looking for it.
Are there other hybrid threats where you would say this is coming from the Russian side, these are the most relevant ones for Bulgaria? Can you just give us a couple of other examples? And maybe also what your government is planning to do or already doing to counter them.
There was one very good report in 2016, I think, written by a Bulgarian think tank, jointly with the CSIS, the Center for Security International Studies in Washington. It was called the Kremlin Playbook. If you haven't seen it, it's a very solid report. They have then other versions. They covered several Eastern European countries, how Russia exercises the hybrid leverage. And they had another one on Western Europe, and they have a third one now. So very, very influential, very, very good and solid report. And they explained there how the Russians managed to use economic influence to gain political positions, to turn those political positions in increased economic influence, and all that using corruption throughout the cycle. They even call that unvirtuous cycle. And indeed, this is the case. In the country, we have several examples. The Russians used to have a hold of some strategic industries or provision of essential services. That was practically the full dependence on gas, significant dependence on oil, crude oil, dependence on maintaining the nuclear power station with nuclear fuel and what you do with the nuclear fuel. They had stakes in the telecom sector. In the media, they have influence in the media, although it's not always that obvious. And unfortunately for Mr. Putin, now with the war and that absolutely clear division who is who and who wants to achieve what objectives, we started getting rid of that little by little. The Russians in 2022, they said, now we want everyone to pay in rubles. And because the contracts with Poland and Bulgaria expired first, and they said, okay, you have to pay in rubles. We said, no, we don't agree. Then we're stopping the gas. And they stopped the gas. Fortunately, we are part of a community of democratic nations, rich nations, capable nations. We have friends, and our friends help us to remedy this. So now we're not getting Russian gas anymore since then, and the prices went down. Now we are much better. We are now doing the same thing with the nuclear fuel. We have contracts already with French and American companies to provide nuclear fuel and maintain that. So that's another channel of influence. now with the restrictions on using Russian oil and selling oil products, the European Union decided on, what was the name, allowing certain countries to continue using Russian oil because of the specific market environment. And we had that allowance till the end of this year, but the Parliament said no. You're stopping selling oil products produced from Russian oil from 1st of January, and from 1st of March, you're not allowed to use any more Russian oil. So is that difficult? Is it challenging? It is. Are there solutions? Most likely. The Russians own this big refinery. It's the biggest, not only in Bulgaria, it's probably the biggest on the Balkans, the refinery. And they say, we'll sell the refinery. We say, okay, please do sell it. But you know, they also, another leverage was the continuous use of Soviet legacy equipment. They had access to our military, they were getting contracts, etc. Little by little, that is going away as well. And there will be remaining sources of leverage, certainly, but one by one, I would say we succeed in taking out the leverage from them. And this is the way ahead.
This was really fascinating, and you also stressed the importance of community and of being part of a strong alliance, if I interpret that correctly. Let's come to a slightly different topic, to EU. And during her visit to Tirana last year, the German foreign minister stressed that the EU accession of Western Balkan states was a geopolitical necessity. Now, what do you think, what role can Bulgaria play to support accession efforts of the Western Balkan states in the future?
Bulgaria has been very supportive for EU endeavors of the Western Balkans. Our understanding is that Europe will not be whole and free unless some countries remain outside the main organizations in Europe, both the European Union and NATO. We are ready to share experience, and we have done that already. But unfortunately, some countries who claim that they want to be EU members continue to play with Russia, for example. And lately, especially, they lend to Chinese influence as well. So they seem not to understand that it is practically impossible to benefit from all the economic networks and linkages inside and funds, while at the same time, in terms of security, they are in the other camp. That's impossible. Okay? And they need to be given a clear message in that regard, and I think they are given the clear message. Others understand that better, but as a result of some historical reasons, some friction from the past, hesitate to make the necessary steps. Because I kind of feel that the question on Macedonia is coming. Probably I will say directly that there is this friction with Greece, Bulgaria, Macedonia, who is who they are, what historically has happened. But we don't want to be like Mr. Putin in his last interview to refer to events 1,500 years ago. Okay, so we are very practical in that regard. And during the French presidency of the European Union, there was negotiated certain measures that Macedonia needs to implement, and once they implement it, we'll be more than happy to welcome them to the European Union. But again, this Russian influence of the Balkans is continuous, and I'm afraid they are even trying to deepen their influence and strengthen their influence right now, while the war is going on. Because compared to the war effort, that's pennies. You know, it's not much money. They understand that very well, and they do invest into strengthening their influence where possible. And we just we are ready to support our neighbors or countries in the neighborhood so that they can become sooner than later members of both NATO and the European Union.
Thank you so much for addressing this question. I think it's also a very relevant one. Before opening the floor to the audience, and please prepare your questions, allow me one last question from my side about Bulgaria and Black Sea security, because I think what's going on right now, the cooperation between Bulgaria, Turkey, and Romania is really exceptional, the demining effort. And maybe you could shed just a bit light on what's happening in the framework of this demining initiative, and how do you plan to get more European allies on board, and what should be their role also in the Black Sea region?
Well, the Black Sea region is there's a war going on in the Black Sea. Not directly in our territorial waters or the exclusive economic zone, but indirectly we are impacted by floating sea mines or drone coming our way, or a missile coming our way, or to Romania. So there are risks, clearly. In addition to that, the Russians decided to declare an exercise in our exclusive economic zone in midsummer. And they exercised, I'm putting that in quotation marks, because most of the time they were not there. But they said, this is closed now, this is a dangerous area, do not enter, for half a year. And at about that time, if you recall, they fired some shots at commercial ships. They boarded one ship. Basically, their idea was to block the traffic from the Ukrainian ports that exports primarily grain and grain products, but not only, towards the Bosphorus. And that traffic goes through, it doesn't go through Russian waters, it goes through Ukrainian and Romanian and Bulgarian and Turkish waters. There are risks related to critical infrastructure, undersea infrastructure. They basically block the exploration of the economic resources in our exclusive economic zone. So all these factors make the situation in the Black Sea undesirable. So, and we came up with this idea. Actually, you know, that's funny. I went to Odessa in August. On the way back, stopped to see my Romanian colleague, and we talked. We need to do something about this. You know, we need to do something together. At the same time, our foreign minister was in Ankara. And when I went out of the Romanian Ministry of Defense, I got a call now that the Turks have a proposal. You know, it was really a matter of minutes, practically. And so we had several meetings. We discussed the concept of the operation, the text of a memorandum. It is already signed, but now it needs to go through the Turkish parliament for ratification. And we agree that we won't be talking about details of this memorandum. What I can share with you is that it will be open for allies to join this operation within the constraints of the Montreal Convention, which translates into without coming with ships, with naval ships into the Black Sea, but there are other ways, and we are open for contribution by allies, other surveillance systems, countermine teams. There are ways with which allies can contribute to this operation. As a side effect of this endeavor, our expectation is that it will become less likely for the Russians to come our way. So they still may try, but it becomes less likely. And that will allow the normal traffic, safer traffic, to the extent possible in times of war, of course.
To the extent that you can speak about that, but do you think this effort might be perceived as a provocation or might be interpreted as a provocation by the Russian side? And is there already plans going on how to prevent that? Again, if you can talk about that.
Why do we need to bother? I mean, the Russians decide that something they don't like, they say this is a provocation. But we pursue our own interests, no need to worry every time how the Russians will react. I mean, this is something which we need and will start doing for the safety of maritime traffic, safety of the ports, safety of the coastline, the citizens, cities, etc. So this is our responsibility. They may say, Madame Zakharova may say whatever she wants, but this is our responsibility to protect our own interests.
Thank you for this clear answer. That said, I would like to open the floor to your questions, and I think my colleague Sophie, she has a microphone, and I think we have a first question here, over there, this table.
Is it on? Okay. Thank you so much, Minister, for doing this. Really appreciate your comments. I just have two quick questions. As a NATO member, when you hear remarks coming out of the US that if certain countries don't contribute certain amounts, how does that, what's the reaction on a country level in terms of, does that as a defense minister, you know, make you think that perhaps there should be less focus on the collective and more focus on building up sort of national capabilities? And then with Bulgaria entering the Schengen area, what does that mean for security concerns, or is there? Thank you.
We're not collecting questions. On the first question, I'm not that worried. We understand that Mr. Trump is conducting an election campaign, first within the party, and then possibly national. His position about the 2% was extremely clear when he was a president. So it doesn't come as a surprise. That's understood by everyone. So it is not exactly clear to whom that message was directed, in addition to his own electorate. And it was immediately there were statements by ministers, by the NATO Secretary General that we have this Article 5. It's the foundational pillar of our alliance, and it will be activated whenever necessary. So, I remember when first Mr. Trump came as president, he had some interesting ideas shared. That he appointed General Mattis, James Mattis, as Secretary of Defense. General Mattis was there this morning. We were at breakfast together with some other people, and then he was replaced. But still, I mean, we need to understand that the U.S. They have a solid, more than 200 years tradition with checks and balances among different institutions. I think that our American friends will find a way to protect their own interests and the interests of their friends, because it's not a one-way street. It's not only Europe benefiting from the U.S. contribution, it's also the U.S. Benefiting from having strong allies in democratic countries. On the Schengen, it's again to a significant extent the fact that we joined only partially the Schengen area is explained by local elections, I mean national elections in one of the countries that had some objections. Another country that had objections, they checked, the Netherlands, they checked this, they monitored the situation over years, they did some other checks, and they happily voted for the entry of Bulgaria and Romania into the Schengen area. Even in the parliament, we had a meeting with Mr. Rutte last week. It was very friendly, full support from the Netherlands. So now it's only one country that is keeping us from full integration into Schengen. We are optimistic that this issue will be resolved, hopefully already this year. We'll see.
And next question over there.
One question, Minister. Thank you very much for the explanations until now. In addition to the war that Russia initiated in Ukraine in the last years, and we saw also recently the conflict initiated in Israel because of the attacks in Israel, but we see also instability in other countries like China, the Balkans, you mentioned it already. Are there any of these other potential hotspots worrying you as a minister of Bulgaria, especially because of the probability that something will happen in the near term or because of the impact that it may have at a global level? And then do you think that if we stop Russia, this will limit or will decrease the probability that other events, conflicts will start around the world? Thank you.
Well, for us, one of the security risks comes from the potentially high level of illegal migration. And if we look at the numbers, where the illegal migrants come from, they continue to come from Afghanistan. So there's no conflict. I mean, the US is out, the operation is over now, but things are not settled down there. And about half of the illegal migrants, people that try to cross into Europe through the Bulgarian border, are coming from that direction. Syria is the second one in the Syria conflict. We should not forget about it. Nothing is resolved there. Also, what goes on in Sahel is on our radar, because it's again, if you have followed it, it's three countries, one after the other, experienced a coup d'etat, and not accidentally, the private military company Wagner was active there when the coups were conducted. So the Russians are increasing their foothold there, and supposedly they're replacing other guarantees for security, but we see increased presence of terrorist groups in those countries. And with the so-called 360 degrees approach and European policy to the south, not only to the east, that those are the conflicts that are higher on, let's say, on our radar. Okay.
Are there any more? Yeah, the gentleman over there, and also maybe the gentleman first, and then Jane.
Okay. About the young generation in Bulgaria, how they trust the government, and are they more orientated to abroad, or are they orientated to Bulgaria? And the Turkish minority, are they orientated to Bulgaria, or are they more orientated to Turkey? Have they maybe double passports?
Yes. Well, we have a minority of about 10% of ethnically Turkish minority. During the communist times, a lot of people of that origin left the country, live in Turkey. Many of them have, and their descendants are getting Bulgarian passports for the moment. I mean, these are normal things. They do not worry us. Actually, the relations are getting better lately. Actually, I'll be on an official visit to Ankara in just 3 days. There, we have many other agreements in the field of defense and in the field of security. Turkey is a very solid partner and ally. They invest a lot of effort in preventing illegal migration as well. So there's nothing to worry us in this. Regarding the younger generation more generally, if I understood the question, I'm not sure what the data is. The young people, those that are active, of course, they are used now to travel, no borders. They do not know what a border is. Basically, it's not like when I was young. When I was young, you could not go even to parts of the country that are close to the border, not to mention to cross the border. You know, so and now it's the first time I left the country, I was 26. My kids, before they turned 18, they had been to, I don't know, a dozen of countries at least, and they do not understand what would be not to be able to travel. So they appreciate, I'm sure, they appreciate our Bulgaria being part of Europe, of this democratic alliance, the opportunities for work, for studies, etc. Of course, some small part are probably lent to the Russian propaganda, which is inevitable given how strong it still is in the country. But with the young people, they are practically, as a rule, oriented towards democracy, freedom, etc.
And then I guess we have one, maybe the last question. Yeah, Jane, please.
Thank you. I want to come back to this 360-degree policy, bearing in mind that NATO said at the Vilnius summit that it would launch a deep and comprehensive reflection on its policies and partnerships in the southern flank or southern neighbourhoods. What is your view about the appropriate role for NATO in the south, and how can the 360-degree approach be made a reality when the challenges to the east are so enormous? Thank you.
Well, as a defense minister of an eastern flank country, our eyes are on the east. Of course, we participate in all the discussions and all that. I can share with you that at the breakfast this morning at 7 a.m., I sat next to a 4-star general who is a commander of the land forces for Europe and Africa. So, which is a sign that that's the EUCOM, the European Command of the United States. But just like when we discuss European security, and we understand well that we need to take a much bigger share for our own security and not to rely to the great extent we have used to on our American friends. That's particularly valid when we look south. I mean, you remember that operation in Libya? It was not a NATO operation. It was conducted by a coalition of countries led by the UK and France. They got very quickly out of ammunition. So again, the Americans had to provide ammunition, but it's a fact of life that Europe needs to take more care about the Middle East, well, North Africa, let's say, parts of the Middle East on our own, within Europe. How exactly that will happen with all the, now in Africa, recent years, Russian influence increasing, economically the Chinese influence is increasing a lot, so it is not as clear. But in terms of security, it's still Europe needs to take a bigger share of providing the security to the south.
I see we have 2 more questions. Is that fine for you?
Yeah.
It seems like there's a lot of things we need to talk about.
No problem.
Thank you so much for being here tonight. What do you think about Iranian and Russian cyber activities concerning energy and utilities and telecommunications?
Maybe in the interest of time, we can also take the next question.
You. In your opinion, Minister Tagarev, what are the 3 major characteristics of security? Like a meta question.
Of security?
Yes, the 3 major characteristics.
That's very philosophical.
Yes.
Very.
So I'm Bulgarian and...
Yeah, I understand by the accent. Cyber is high on the agenda, not as high as it has been probably last year, but I was at a dinner last night which was dedicated to cybersecurity, protection of critical infrastructures. So, and the good thing is that the business was more active for that dinner and those discussions last night. And they are taking that very seriously. with including certification of products and services, security of supply chains, etc. Because indeed, it's not only Russia and Iran, but other countries will exploit vulnerabilities when they have the ways and means to exploit those vulnerabilities, and that has happened many times. When we look at Putin's aggression 2 years ago, it started with cyber attack. On the morning of 24th of February, Ukrainians had no governmental communications. Fortunately, Starlink came up with a solution for them. But it's just an example of how important that is, not just for the functioning of the economy, but also for the functioning of the military, and just we need to be ready. NATO recognized already a few years ago the cyber as a fifth domain of operations, and we're investing in the efforts to protect that domain and to conduct, if necessary, different types of operations in cyberspace. The three features of security, that's indeed, at this hour, I'm not sure I can give you a good response. Maybe, I don't know, in the response, I mean, without security, there's no life. If we look at Maslow, you know, in the famous pyramid he drafted, I don't know when, many decades ago. So it's indispensable for our lives, for our functioning. It is, some people see it, look at security as a public good that someone has to provide. For example, governments, the authorities need to provide, but that's not always possible. And the provision needs to come with investments at individual, family levels, community levels, company levels, in resilience to all sorts of threats. I came up with two. Allow me to stop here.
That was a very beautiful answer. May I ask you one last question? I don't see any other. Oh, yeah, we still have one. Can we go on?
Sure.
The interest in Bulgaria is high, so let's take another question.
Thank you very much for taking the time to answering so many questions and for your very valuable insight. My name is Natalia Müller. I'm the chairwoman of the Young Council on German Foreign Relations here in Munich. And my question is, how much of a threat is the Russian presence in Serbia? And how much of a threat is it to the Balkans accession countries to the EU accession? Perhaps Serbia is the country that is most prominent to be down to Russian influence, but also how do you assess the threat of Russian presence in this accession countries to the EU? Thank you.
Yeah, it is. Well, we didn't talk much about the security situation in the Western Balkans, but it worsened. Probably those of you who work in the field have noticed in the last year with the incident in Banska. You remember Kosovo policemen killed. They identified some paramilitary units getting weapons, being organized, etc. A company we had in reserve was activated and went to Kosovo to strengthen KFOR very quickly. We had discussions now in other ways to provide for reserves to strengthen whenever necessary both KFOR and Altea, that is in Kosovo and Bosnia and Herzegovina. To what extent that is due to Russian influence, we do not have firm evidence, but certainly the Russians are interested in having unstable regions, as many as possible, and as unstable as possible. And we cannot exclude their interest in what goes on nearby. Their influence in other countries, you know, they had this unsuccessful coup attempt in Montenegro, when was it, 2016 or so, which behind which was some Russian influence, not necessarily the organization of the conflict, but the influence through the Orthodox Church and economic leverage. They are there, so we cannot be really sufficiently confident in our security if they have at their disposal a significant leverage to exercise influence, because Mr. Putin does not hesitate much to use it when available. So that's what I talked about earlier, about security arrangements of some countries, that they cannot be in the European Union, but to have security arrangements with other countries, that just is not going to work. There's enough reports what exactly is happening there. I do not have the time to read all of them, but know that whoever is interested, policymakers, have access to good information on that, and just we need to work with these countries as partners and good partners and future allies, and help them to alleviate that influence in the future. Okay.
Looking around, don't be shy. Okay, we have another question over there, the gentleman behind Sophie.
Yes, just a very quick question on industry. So I was wondering if you have seen any very big, let's say, frictions that exist between having a very resilient industry and a very profitable industry. So just a general question on that, and then if we have time, I was also wondering about Bulgaria's posture on the use of space for defense, and exactly which degree of autonomy would you be interested in pursuing in this domain? Thank you.
Do you say use of space?
Space assets, that is.
Well, Bulgaria is a small country, not even 1/10 of Germany. So we are not very, very ambitious, although we happen to have, on the space part of the questions, we happen to have one fairly new innovative company that already designs, produces, certifies, and launches satellites. Small satellites, but satellites. We have a project now that they launched 25 satellites for a variety of purposes, primarily for civilian use, but we'll see whether we can use that. On the defense industry, of course, there is tension between profitability and resilience, but the defense industry is not a typical industry. It's not. I mean, if a company producing wine goes bankrupt, there are many other companies. But if the company that produces and maintains your tanks or planes goes bankrupt, then you're in trouble. So what the discussion actually is about having a European or Euro-Atlantic defense technological and industrial base that requires a lot of cooperation between public authorities and the industry. And that is happening, I can assure you. In many ways, just a few months ago, the European Commission approved this 500 million euro fund for enhancing the capacity for the production of ammunition. And there are many other talks about this. Actually, in the Defense Ministerial 2 days ago, and also the European Defense Ministerial 2 weeks ago, that was a very big topic on the agenda, and what will be coming in that direction. Okay.
And Sophie seems to have a question too.
Utilise having the microphone. So first of all, thank you very much for being here this evening and for your comments so far. We've heard a lot about all of the challenges that everyone faces in the world today, not only Bulgaria. We've spoken specifically about Bulgaria challenges with disinformation, espionage, migration, the list goes on, the war in Ukraine. You opened by saying that discussions at the conference have been divided into camps of both pessimism and optimism. So I wonder if we could perhaps end on an optimistic note and hear what you are feeling the most optimistic about for the future.
The division is not so clear. I mean, it's not you are pessimist, you are optimist. You never know. People hesitate often. They may change their mood, etc. What I'm optimistic that first Europe and North America will find a way to continue work together for the common good. I'm optimistic that NATO will be able to develop all the capabilities necessary and all the arrangement necessary to protect our own common security. Okay.
I think that was a very beautiful answer. So please join me in an applause for the Minister for taking the time to speak to us.